Happy Monday, and welcome back to the Lorden Arts channel. I'm John Lorden. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. Case Cracked is the show where we look into a mystery, and what are the critical pieces that help solve that mystery. Today's episode is called Unknown Male Number 1. Brembate di Sopra is a small municipality in Lombardy, Italy. If you look this comune or municipality up online, you'll find very little, but one search result always seems to come up: the story of Yara Gambarasio. On Friday, November 26, 2010, 13-year-old Yara lived with her parents in Brembate di Sopra, attended high school, and took rhythmic gymnastics. She had a show that she was looking forward to later that weekend. But at 5:15 p.m., she told her family that she needed to return a stereo to her instructor at the gym where she practiced, less than a mile away. With a smile, she said she would be back soon. By 7 p.m., she hadn't returned. Her mother, Maura, began to worry, calling her daughter's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She shared her concern with her husband, Fulvio, and soon they called local authorities. The state police and the Carabinieri, which carry out domestic policing duties, were searching for Yara. Investigators first questioned her gym instructor, who said that she had seen the young girl earlier that day. After some light training, Yara left, and her instructor didn't hear from her or see her again. Outside the gym, witnesses claimed to have seen two men standing near a red car, and it seemed they were holding a conversation with Yara. Unfortunately, this information was all they were able to offer. When her friends were questioned, investigators were able to establish the time of her last contact. It was a text sent at 6:44 p.m. the night she disappeared to her friend Martina. In it, she agreed to meet with her on Sunday at 8 a.m. The local magistrate, a former officer herself, Letizia Ruggeri, took quick action and was soon in charge of the investigation. She sent out the Seguggio Italiano, a special breed of Italian bloodhound, to try to pick up Yara's scent. The hounds soon found it and traced it to the town of Mapolo, which was just under 3 miles away. Cell phone pings confirmed Yara, or at least her phone, was indeed in the town at 6:49 p.m. Unfortunately, they could find no trace of her or her cell phone, which was now turned off or disabled. With no easy answers at hand, investigators started to look at the Gambarasio family. Fulvio and Maura were known and well-liked in town. Fulvio worked as an architect, and Maura was a teacher in nearby Longuello. They could find no problems with their marriage, their relationship with Yara, or her other siblings, which consisted of an older sister and 2 younger brothers. Ruggeri ordered wiretaps on hundreds of phones in the area. She also ordered a trace on all cell phones that had passed through Mapolo the day Yara disappeared, which would be more than 100,000 phones. 15,000 were checked before they had a suspect, a Moroccan man named Mohammed Fikri. When a wiretap was applied to his phone in late November, he was heard to say, "Forgive me, God, I didn't kill her." By the time they tracked his last known whereabouts, he was on a boat headed back to Morocco. When the boat was intercepted on December 4th, he was arrested, but soon cleared. His wiretapped conversation had reportedly been translated incorrectly. For months, the Gambarasios kept to themselves, worrying and hoping for a miracle. Mass was held in Yara's honor, and her family kept calling and leaving voice messages on her cell. The calls always went straight to voicemail, but they hoped that if Yara heard at least one of them, it would give her hope, or maybe even bring her home. On February 26th of 2011, exactly 3 months after she went missing, Yara's body was found in Chignolo di Sola by a man flying his radio-controlled plane in a field 6 miles from her home. When investigators arrived, they found her in an advanced state of decomposition. They also located the clothes she was wearing, her iPod, house keys, and the SIM card and battery from her phone, but the phone itself was missing. An autopsy would show that Yara had suffered a head injury as well as several stab wounds to different parts of her body. However, none of that should have been lethal. It was also found that her nasal passages contained traces of lime. This, coupled with traces of a vegetable fiber used to make rope called jute that was found on her clothes, told them that her murderer likely worked in construction. They found one other important clue. Some of her clothing also contained traces of an unknown liquid. That liquid contained male DNA that became known as Ignoto 1, or unknown male number 1. Although it could not be determined what exactly the liquid was, investigators felt that the man must have become injured while assaulting Yara, but apparently he didn't directly end her life. He left her after the attack, and exposure to the elements would be what finally took Yara. Investigators next doubled down on their data collection. The police took DNA samples from anyone who came into contact with Yara. The Carabinieri took samples from anyone whose cell phone had traveled from Brambate di Sopra to Chignolo di Sola the night of the murder. Her case would turn out to be one of the most expensive manhunts in Italian history. By the time of Yara's funeral in late May of 2011, investigators had no leads, so they decided to concentrate their efforts in the area where she was found. Near the field she was found at in Mapolo was a busy nightclub called Quicksand. On Friday and Saturday nights, Ruggeri's team would take DNA samples to cross-reference with unknown male number 1. The nightclub required a membership card, which made it easy to track down any samples that were of interest. Although not an exact match, a sample was found that was very similar to the police's sample. It came from a man named Damiano Guerinoni. He was in South America the day Yara died, but with the partial match, they knew that it had to be someone he was related to. This led them down a very interesting path. Damiano's mother was a woman named Aurora Zani, and she was Yara's housekeeper for 10 years. She was no longer working for the family in 2011, but still maintained a good relationship with them. After intense investigation and questioning, both Damiano and Aurora were excluded as suspects. Next, Ruggeri's teams turned their efforts to mapping out the Guerinoni family tree. They narrowed the tree down to a possible suspect, Damiano's uncle, Giuseppe. Even though he had died in 1999, they were able to find 2 stamps that he had licked containing his DNA. When they were tested, it showed that he was unknown male number 1's father. With the finish line seemingly in sight, they then tested his 2 sons' DNA. However, neither was a match. Investigators concluded that Giuseppe had an illegitimate child. By this time, Yara's family was disillusioned with the investigation and wanted answers. In March of 2013, they hired a private investigator who looked into the case. Giuseppe was a bus driver, but to coworkers, he was known as a womanizer and had talked to at least one person about how he got a young woman in trouble. In June of 2014, one of the PI's sources came forward with that young woman's name, Esther Arzuffi. When the information was relayed to Ruggeri's team, they found that Esther had given them a DNA sample in July of 2012, but it had been erroneously tested. Instead of comparing her DNA to unknown male number 1's sample, it was somehow compared to Yara's. When it was retested, it was confirmed that she was the killer's mother. For almost a decade, she had carried on an affair with Giuseppe, even after her marriage. In 1970, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. The boy was named Massimo Giuseppe Bossetti, who was now a married 42-year-old construction worker who lived in Mapolo, the last place Yara's cell phone pinged in 2010. Afraid that her suspect would find out that he was being investigated, on June 15th, Ruggeri set up a roadblock, knowing Bossetti would have to go through it. When he arrived, he was then administered a fake breathalyzer test. In actuality, they used the fake breathalyzer to collect his DNA. Testing was carried out overnight, and it showed that Bossetti was indeed unknown male number 1. The next day, he was arrested and charged with murder. Investigators also found that Bossetti frequented the same areas as Yara, and his van contained the same fibers found on her clothes. His internet searches focused on young girls, but most telling were his cell phone records. They showed that he was in Brambate di Sopra when Yara disappeared, and it was shut off between 5:45 p.m. that night and 7:34 a.m. the next morning. His trial was held in July of 2016. Bossetti proclaimed his innocence, but he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison for Yara's murder. He also lost all his parental rights to his 3 children. In response, the Gambarasio family said, quote, "Now we know who it was. Even if we know, no one will bring Yara back to us." Yara's family has justice, and 3 other families are faced with new realities and truths. Giuseppe's widow was forced to accept that not only was her deceased husband unfaithful, but he had other children as well. Giovanni Bossetti, the man that raised Massimo and was husband to Esther Arzuffi, learned that none of his 3 children were his. In addition to the twins Esther had with Giuseppe, their 3rd child, Fabio, was not his son either. Esther continues to deny that she ever had one affair, let alone 2. Finally, we have Bossetti's twin sister. She had to accept that the father she had been raised by was not her biological father, but even worse, that her brother was a murderer. Case cracked. I would like to thank The Guardian, thelocalit.com, the New York Times, adnchronos.com, and oggit.com for information contributing to today's story. Of course, the biggest thank you goes to Christy Arnhart for researching and writing up today's case, and here she is to discuss it with us now. Christy, a lot of tragedies in this one outside of the obvious with Yara. There's just a lot of family kind of drama and dragging of reputations that happens with this case in particular.
Oh, yes.
But if finding out that your father isn't your father and your brother is a murderer isn't enough, you sent me some information that Massimo's twin sister faced even more?
Yes. After the trial, she was beaten several times by strangers, I understand if you're a part of the family and you're angered and you get into a fight, but for somebody on the street to take that level of anger out on you when you have nothing to do with any of it.
Yeah. I don't know how she gets blamed in any of that. That's really sad.
Me either.
The Guardian calls this the murder that obsessed Italy, but we have this investigation and it's routing out a lot of private information. Like I mentioned, it's taken several families and it's dragging out those skeletons in the closet.
It is. And one paper called it a genetic soap opera, and it really is.
Yeah.
The Italian press got slammed for covering the affairs and spreading them through the public. Now, generally, everyone now seems to agree that the information should have been guarded more closely, but that doesn't help this family.
Yeah, definitely not. But it's good to hear that maybe there was a learning experience in that.
Thank goodness.
It's tough because the way they were going with their approach, like there's a lot of things that they were doing out there I don't know if you could do here. Like, you're putting wiretaps on possibly 100,000 phones and all that kind of stuff. But then to hit that information, it's one of those things where I guess you have to try to strike the right balance of we've got this DNA sample and the obvious answer isn't coming back. Like we found the guy, we found the father, but his children, that isn't matching. And I don't know, I guess you would have to look at the press at the time about what details were released and kind of how they came out. But you're still in this mode of having to engage the public and kind of asking them for help in certain ways. One of the things that's kind of a highlight in this case is all that DNA testing that they were doing at Quicksand and all that. They didn't have to ask for warrants or anything like that. Everyone was volunteering. Like this,
I know.
That community was stepping up to try to help this case of this 13-year-old girl. So, there's a lot of kind of ups and downs when you're looking at this. Essentially, you have the secret of a dead man that ripples across numerous families and breaks a lot of hearts in this.
Well, I mean, if it's not hard enough to take all of this in, they had to exhume the body to confirm that the DNA matched the DNA on the stamps, and having to go through that again must have just been terrible.
Yeah. Can you imagine? I mean, to hear this information coming in about, this whole other family and then that family going through this, there's some other guy that's my father. Oh, and by the way, they're exhuming his body right now because they want to rerun the DNA tests. And he's not
Yeah.
even the suspect in this, you know? I mean, it's crazy. Another, and I don't know if this was more social media or maybe more at the press level, but I was seeing that Ruggieri faced a lot of harsh criticism, including some pretty sexist commentary from the public while this investigation was going on, kind of around the realm of like, how could a woman expect to solve a case this complex? And I know people are critical of how long it took. I know the family kind of, as we frequently see in investigations like this, family got frustrated also with the investigation, started launching their own stuff. But ultimately, we have her taking very quick action at the start, doing things, like I said, that I don't even think you could do in this country. But really,
No.
she was going after it. She was shaking every tree she could to try to get this thing solved. And it pays off. It does take time, but it does eventually pay off.
It does. I mean, she ran the best investigation that she could. It was not easy on any front. None of it was. There was one piece of information that I came across that didn't really fit into any of this, but it's so unusual. When officers were looking into Fikri, they also found in his van that he had a blood-stained mattress in there, but the blood was found to not be helpful to the investigation. What is up with that?
Yeah.
I mean, don't you think you should look into that too?
Yeah. Well, and that's weird because, you know, we have him kind of getting written off because it was like, oh, the translation was bad. But as they're investigating, we're finding a mattress with blood on it. Yeah, exactly. Is there something else that's going on around this?
Well, and I found another instance where they got these really unusual fake confessions. Quote, a further twist in the case came last summer when a note confessing to the crime was written in a church's visitor's book. Just days later, a letter was found under the doormat of a hospital chapel confessing to the crime, which was also followed by a phone call to the hospital's reception.
Wow. Yeah. I don't know how this happens, but, you know, we see this happen a lot in cases that we talk about as well. There's just people looking for attention, and they do bizarre things to get that.
They do.
Yeah. And especially, I mean, for a case that has gripped a whole country like this one did, they probably recognize that the level of attention they can get, oh yeah, if I do this stupid thing and call in this, you know, false confession or leave this note here, let me see if that makes it in the newspaper. And I mean, it's like they're trolling the reality of this case.
I know, it's detrimental and sad.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Christy, thank you so much for all your hard work on this. We really appreciate you. And I've got some other people to thank right now. Thank you, PayPal supporters Michael Park, Larissa Mertshank, Jennifer Wilson, and Hillary Green. If you'd like to support the channel, please visit lordandarts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee, like Perlette Toussaint recently did. We know that learning about the mechanisms that help support and find justice in these cases is important to understand the many unsolved cases we also cover, and we really appreciate your support in allowing us to continue doing that. Remember, you can get another Lord and Art story every week on the Seriously Mysterious podcast. A new episode is coming tomorrow and every Tuesday after that. Visit seriouslymysterious.com and remember to subscribe on your favorite podcatchers. While you're here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon below if you want to catch one of our weekly Secret Studio live shows. And of course, I'll be back with a new Unsolved Mystery for you on Friday, right here on the Lord and Arts channel.